She's too weak to be Luna. The words echoed across the throne room just as Evelyn Carter hit the cold marble floor. A sharp gasp swept through the crowd, followed almost instantly by laughter. Crystal chandeliers flickered above hundreds of noble wolves dressed in silver and black, their jeweled rings catching the firelight as they stared down at the trembling Omega at the center of the room. Evelyn pressed one hand against the polished floor, trying to steady herself before anyone noticed how badly her fingers shook. The silk sleeve covering her wrist had torn when she fell, exposing pale skin already bruised from grabbing the edge of the ceremonial stairs too hard. Somewhere behind her, another voice laughed softly. "Look at her. She can't even stand properly." Heat crawled into Evelyn's cheeks, but she lowered her eyes and said nothing. That was how she survived this palace. Silence. Silence when they whispered about her in the hallways. Silence when servants shoved extra work into her arms because they knew she would never complain. Silence when noble daughters mocked the way her Omega scent faded too quickly, too weak to command attention from anyone in the kingdom. Above all of them sat Alpha King Lucian Blackthorn. Massive black banners framed the throne behind him, their silver wolf crest glowing beneath the torchlight. He looked untouched by the noise around him, one gloved hand resting against the arm of his throne, his expression unreadable in the shadows. Evelyn had heard stories about him since she was a little girl. The Alpha King who defeated rogue packs before turning 25. The ruler whose aura alone could force rival alphas onto their knees. The man so feared that no woman lasted more than a few minutes in his presence without trembling. But tonight, he simply watched. And somehow, that hurt more than the laughter. Evelyn slowly pushed herself upright while nobles lined both sides of the throne room like spectators waiting for a public execution. Her plain ivory dress looked almost colorless beside their expensive gowns stitched with silver thread. She did not belong here. Everyone knew it. Why was she even invited? One noblewoman whispered loudly enough for half the room to hear. The kingdom needs a Luna beside the king. Not a frightened little Omega who looks like she'd faint in a snowstorm. More laughter. Evelyn swallowed hard and fixed her eyes on the floor again. She only needed to survive this ceremony. 1 hour, maybe less. Then she could disappear back into the servant corridors where nobody important would have to look at her anymore. A royal attendant stepped forward and called the next candidate's name, but before the woman could move, a silver goblet suddenly rolled across the marble and stopped beside Evelyn's feet. Red wine spread across the floor like spilled blood. "Oops," a young alpha said with a grin. "Careful, little Omega. The throne room isn't a place for weak things." The room erupted again. Evelyn bent down automatically to clean the mess before it stained the marble, her breathing unsteady as cold wine soaked into her sleeve. Then, for the first time that night, the room went completely silent. Not because of her, because the Alpha King had finally moved. Every sound inside the throne room disappeared beneath the weight of Alpha King Lucian Blackthorn's gaze. Evelyn froze beside the spilled wine, her fingers still wrapped around the silver goblet she had instinctively picked up from the marble floor. The nobles who had been laughing seconds earlier suddenly looked down at their cups or straight ahead at the towering black pillars lining the hall. Nobody wanted to meet the king's eyes when the air changed like this. Even the torches along the walls seemed to burn lower. Lucian rose slowly from the throne, and the movement alone sent unease through the room. His dark coat brushed against the marble steps as he descended one level from the raised platform, silver chains across his chest catching the firelight for only a second before disappearing back into shadow. Evelyn lowered her head immediately. She could feel his presence now, stronger than before, pressing against her chest until breathing became difficult. Stories had never explained what an alpha aura truly felt like. It was not anger. It was pressure, like standing outside during a winter storm while the sky prepared to split open. "Who spilled the wine?" Lucian asked quietly. Nobody answered. The young alpha who had mocked Evelyn seconds earlier suddenly looked far less confident. His smile vanished as Lucian's eyes settled on him for barely a moment. "I asked a question." The alpha swallowed hard. "It was an accident, Your Majesty." Lucian said nothing after that. Somehow, the silence felt worse. Evelyn carefully placed the goblet onto a nearby tray and stepped backward, trying to make herself invisible again. That was when one of the noble women near the front gave a soft laugh. "The poor thing is shaking." Several others smiled behind jeweled fans. Perhaps she should return to the servant halls before she embarrasses herself further. Enough, an older council member muttered, though there was little conviction in his voice. Evelyn kept her eyes lowered as heat burned behind them. She would not cry here, not in front of these people. She had learned years ago that tears only entertained cruel crowds longer. Lucien turned slightly toward the center of the room again. Continue the ceremony. The royal attendant nodded quickly and unrolled a long parchment with trembling hands. The trial of the future Luna will now begin. A ripple of excitement spread through the nobles at once. This was the moment everyone had waited for. One by one, noble daughters stepped forward beneath the silver moon crest painted into the marble floor. Some displayed strength through combat forms. Others demonstrated control over their wolf aura or recited ancient bloodline vows passed down through powerful pacts. Applause followed every performance. Admiring whispers filled the hall. Evelyn stood alone near the back of the candidates, hands folded tightly in front of her plain ivory dress. She already knew what everyone expected from her. Failure. When the attendant finally called her name, several nobles exchanged amused looks before she even moved. This should be entertaining, someone murmured. Evelyn inhaled slowly and stepped toward the center of the throne room. Her worn shoes echoed softly against the marble floor while hundreds of eyes followed her every movement. She could feel judgment pressing against her skin from every direction. But as she reached the silver crest beneath the chandeliers, one feeling unsettled her more than all the others combined. Alpha King Lucien Blackthorn was still watching her, and he had not looked away once. Evelyn stopped at the center of the silver moon crest and immediately felt the weight of the throne room close around her. Hundreds of eyes followed every breath she took. The chandeliers above cast pale light across the polished marble beneath her feet, making the small tears in her dress impossible to hide now. Somewhere near the front row, a noblewoman gave a quiet laugh. She looks terrified. Evelyn kept her hands folded tightly in front of her to stop them from shaking. The royal attendant stepped beside her with a ceremonial staff carved from white oak. State your name and bloodline before the court. Her throat tightened. Evelyn Carter, she answered softly. No active pack affiliation. A few nobles smirked instantly. No active pack. Another reminder that she belonged nowhere. You may begin the first trial, the attendant announced. Across the throne room, silver lanterns suddenly brightened one by one, revealing a long polished pathway etched with ancient moon symbols. Every future Luna candidate had crossed this same path for generations. Some did it with confidence, others with pride. Evelyn took her first step carefully. The symbols beneath her shoes glowed faintly for a moment before dimming again. Whispers spread through the room almost immediately. Nothing, not even a proper response from the moonstones. Pathetic. Evelyn heard every word. She kept walking anyway. At the end of the pathway stood a stone pedestal holding a crystal sphere no larger than a basketball. The trial of aura. Candidates were expected to place both hands on the crystal and channel enough inner strength to awaken the light inside it. Earlier that evening, one noble daughter had turned the sphere bright silver. Another had made sparks dance through the air. Evelyn stared at the crystal for one long second before gently placing her hands against its smooth surface. Coldness spread instantly through her palms. The throne room waited. Nothing happened. A few seconds passed. Then more laughter echoed through the hall. Of course, even servant girls have stronger aura than that. Evelyn slowly pulled her hands away, cheeks burning beneath the humiliation. She wanted the marble floor to open beneath her and swallow her whole. But when she lifted her eyes for just a moment, she realized Lucien was still watching her with the same unreadable expression. No amusement, no pity, just silence. Somehow, that unsettled her even more. The attendant cleared his throat awkwardly. The next trial. Servants wheeled forward several silver trays covered with ceremonial objects. Candles, sacred cloth, ancient rings once worn by former Lunas. The candidates were expected to identify the blessed relic among them through instinct alone. Most noble women stepped forward eagerly during this part. Evelyn hesitated. She knew she would fail again. One of the younger alphas leaned toward another and whispered loudly enough for her to hear. Maybe she can identify a broom instead. Quiet laughter spread again. Evelyn inhaled slowly and stepped toward the trays anyway. Her eyes moved across polished silver and flickering candlelight until something strange caught her attention. Near the edge of the last tray, one candle had nearly burned down completely, its flame shaking weakly as melted wax spilled across the cloth beneath it. Nobody else seemed to notice. Before she could think twice, Evelyn reached past the ceremonial objects and carefully steadied the candle so the flame would not go out. The room fell silent again, not because of the trial, because Alpha King Lucien Blackthorn had suddenly leaned forward on his throne for the very first time that night. The tiny candle flame steadied beneath Evelyn's hand, no longer trembling against the silver tray. For a moment, nobody in the throne room seemed to understand why the Alpha King had suddenly shifted forward on his throne. Then an elderly woman near the council table slowly stood from her seat, her pale eyes fixed on the candle with visible surprise. "That flame," she whispered. "It has not responded in years." Murmurs spread instantly across the hall. Evelyn pulled her hand back at once, confusion flickering across her face. "I am sorry," she said quietly. "I did not mean to interrupt the ceremony." The elderly woman stepped closer to the tray, staring at the small golden flame as if she had seen a ghost. "That candle was once carried by the first Luna of the Northern Realm," she said carefully. "It only burns steadily near those with a calming spirit." One of the noble women scoffed loudly. "A servant girl accidentally touching a candle means nothing." Several others nodded in agreement, eager to erase the uncomfortable silence that had settled over the room. Evelyn lowered her gaze again, wishing the attention would disappear. Attention in this palace was dangerous. It always had been. The royal attendant cleared his throat and quickly motioned for the servants to remove the trays. "The final trial will now begin." At once, two guards pulled open the massive silver doors at the far end of the throne room. Cold air rushed inside, carrying the scent of snow and pine from the mountains surrounding the palace. Every noble in the room turned toward the center aisle as four elders entered together in long dark robes. Between them, they carried a black stone pedestal no taller than 3 feet. Resting on top of it was a single silver bowl filled with glowing fire. Evelyn felt her stomach tighten immediately. She recognized it from old stories whispered among the servants. The silver flame, the sacred fire said to reject false hearts. Noble daughters who approached it without true Luna potential were often overwhelmed by its heat before they could even get close. "No," one council member muttered under his breath. "Surely they are not using that tonight." Another answered quietly. The king approved every trial personally. Evelyn's eyes lifted toward Lucien without meaning to. He remained seated in silence, one hand resting beneath his chin as the silver fire reflected faintly in his dark eyes. He looked calm, too calm. The lead elder stepped forward. "Each candidate will approach the silver flame and place one hand above it." Nervous whispers spread through the noble women immediately. Even the strongest among them suddenly looked uncertain. One by one, the candidates stepped forward. Some managed only a few seconds before retreating from the heat. Others flinched the moment the fire brightened beneath their hands. Polite applause followed each attempt, though tension continued building with every failure. Then the elder called Evelyn's name. The throne room erupted with quiet amusement again. This should be quick. She could barely pass the first trials. The flame will probably go out from embarrassment. Evelyn's chest tightened as she walked toward the pedestal. The silver fire danced softly inside the bowl, casting pale light across her face. Up close, it looked strangely alive. Beautiful. Dangerous. She stopped inches away from it while the entire kingdom watched. Her breathing slowed. She could feel the heat against her skin already. Somewhere behind her, someone whispered, "She is going to panic." But Evelyn did not step away. And from the throne above the marble stairs, Lucien Blackthorn never looked away from her for even a second. Evelyn slowly lifted her trembling hand toward the silver flame, while every noble in the throne room watched with thinly disguised anticipation. Some looked amused. Others looked impatient, already expecting failure before she even touched the sacred fire. The pale silver light flickered across her face, illuminating the nervous rise and fall of her breathing. Heat brushed against her fingertips first, soft and strange, nothing like the painful burn she had feared. The elder nearest the pedestal narrowed his eyes carefully. "Place your hand above the center of the flame," he instructed. Evelyn swallowed and obeyed. The moment her hand hovered over the fire, the entire throne room went still. The silver flames twisted upward in slow motion, circling around her wrist instead of pushing her away. Gasps spread through the crowd instantly. One noblewoman stepped backward in disbelief. That is impossible. The fire should have resisted her. Everyone knew that. The silver flame tested worthiness through strength, dominance, bloodline, and spirit. Yet instead of rejecting Evelyn, the sacred fire bent gently toward her like moonlight reaching for the ocean. The silver glow slowly shifted color. First pale gold, then brighter, richer, warmer. Golden light spilled across the marble floor beneath Evelyn's feet, reflecting against the crystal chandeliers above until the entire throne room shimmered beneath it. The elders stared in complete silence. One of them looked visibly shaken. "I have never seen the flame answer like this," he whispered. Evelyn looked down at the glowing fire with confusion written across her face. She had done nothing special. She was only trying not to embarrass herself again. Behind the nobles, whispers spread rapidly through the room like wildfire. "How is this happening? She has no pack. There must be some mistake." But the silver flame continued, glowing brighter beneath her hand, calm and steady. Then suddenly, a sharp voice cut through the silence. "This proves nothing." The warmth in the room vanished instantly. A tall alpha noble stepped forward from the front row, his expression twisted with irritation. Marcus Thornwell, son of one of the most powerful bloodlines in the Northern Realm. Evelyn recognized him immediately. Everyone did. He was known for his pride almost as much as his family's influence. Marcus looked at Evelyn with open disgust. A weak Omega touching a ceremonial flame does not make her worthy of the throne. Several nobles quickly nodded, eager to agree with someone powerful again now that uncertainty had unsettled the room. Marcus walked closer to the pedestal, his polished boots echoing sharply against the marble. "She cannot even control her own aura," he continued coldly. "Look at her. She looks frightened of her own shadow." Quiet laughter returned from parts of the crowd. Evelyn lowered her hand from the flame and stepped back slightly. The golden light immediately dimmed, though traces of warmth still lingered across the room. Marcus smirked when he noticed her retreat. "Exactly." He turned toward the throne. "Your Majesty, with respect, allowing someone like this near the Luna trials insults every bloodline standing in this room." The throne room waited for Lucien's response. But the Alpha King remained silent once again, his dark eyes fixed only on Evelyn. Marcus mistook the silence for permission. He stepped closer to Evelyn until she could smell the sharp cedar scent of his alpha aura pressing against the air. "Tell them the truth," he said quietly enough that only nearby nobles could hear. "You do not belong here." Evelyn's fingers tightened against the fabric of her dress. Her chest ached with humiliation, but she forced herself to speak steadily. "I never asked to stand here." For the first time all evening, something dangerous flickered behind Marcus Thornwell's smile. The dangerous flicker in Marcus Thornwell's smile spread slowly across his face as the throne room watched in tense silence. Evelyn could feel the shift immediately. The nobles nearest them stepped slightly backward, sensing the sharp edge beneath his calm expression. Marcus was not embarrassed by what had happened with the silver flame. He was angry, and angry alphas often needed someone weaker to remind themselves they were still powerful. "You never asked to stand here?" Marcus repeated softly. "Then perhaps somebody should remind you where you actually belong." Before Evelyn could react, Marcus reached toward the silver ribbon pinned to her dress and tore it free in one sharp motion. The delicate fabric drifted to the marble floor beside her feet. Gasps spread through the room. The ribbon marked her as an official Luna candidate. Without it, she looked once again like nothing more than a servant standing in the wrong place. Humiliation burned through Evelyn's chest so quickly she could barely breathe. Several nobles immediately looked away, uncomfortable now that the cruelty had crossed into something uglier. Others simply watched in silence. Nobody stepped forward to help her. Nobody ever did. Marcus looked down at the fallen ribbon with cold amusement. "There," he said quietly. "That looks more honest." Evelyn bent instinctively to pick it up before anyone could step on it. Her fingers shook as she reached for the silver cloth against the marble floor. Then Marcus spoke again, louder this time so the entire throne room could hear. "Tell me, Evelyn Carter," he said. Did you really think the Alpha King would ever choose someone like you? Soft laughter rippled through parts of the crowd again, though weaker than before. Even they seemed uncertain now. Evelyn kept her eyes lowered, staring at the ribbon in her hand. She could feel every gaze in the room pressing against her skin like ice. I never expected anything, she answered quietly. Marcus stepped closer. Of course not. Because deep down, you already know what everyone else sees. Evelyn said nothing. Marcus leaned slightly toward her, his voice dropping lower. Weak. Frightened. Forgettable. The words landed harder than she wanted them to. Not because they were new, but because some part of her had spent years trying not to believe them. The throne room remained perfectly still. Waiting. Watching. Then suddenly, the temperature changed. It happened so fast that several candles along the walls flickered out at once. A heavy pressure rolled through the throne room like distant thunder before a storm. Noble conversations died instantly. Glass trembled softly inside silver goblets. Evelyn felt her breath catch as an overwhelming alpha aura crashed through the hall. Not wild, controlled, but terrifyingly powerful. Marcus stiffened immediately. Slowly, every eye in the room turned toward the throne. Lucian Blackthorn was standing. The shadows behind him seemed darker somehow, his massive frame outlined by silver torchlight as he descended the marble steps one at a time. Nobody spoke. Nobody dared. The pressure in the room grew heavier with every step he took. Several younger alphas lowered their heads automatically beneath the force of his presence. Marcus swallowed hard but forced himself to remain standing straight. Lucian stopped only a few feet away from Evelyn. His gaze shifted briefly toward the torn ribbon in her hand, then toward Marcus. The silence that followed felt endless. Finally, Lucian spoke. Quietly, calmly. Pick it up. Marcus blinked once. Your Majesty? Lucian's eyes never left him. The ribbon, he said. Pick it up, and place it back where it belongs. Marcus Thornwell froze the moment Alpha King Lucian Blackthorn spoke, his voice quiet, yet heavy enough to press against every wall of the throne room. The command was simple, but it carried a weight that made even the bravest nobles hesitate to breathe. Marcus looked around quickly, as if searching for support from the crowd, but found only lowered eyes and silent faces. No one dared to step in. The room had already chosen its fear. Evelyn stood motionless beside Lucian, still holding the torn silver ribbon in her shaking fingers. She did not understand what was happening, but she could feel it clearly. The air no longer belonged to Marcus. It belonged to the king. Marcus forced a nervous laugh. Your Majesty, I believe there has been a misunderstanding. This Omega is not suited for the Luna trials. Everyone here can see it. Lucian did not react. His gaze remained fixed, calm, and unblinking. I told you to pick it up, he repeated. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the distant flames along the walls seemed to still. Slowly, Marcus bent down and picked up the silver ribbon from the marble floor. His movements were stiff, controlled only by the crushing presence of Lucian's aura pressing against him. When he stood again, he hesitated. For the first time that night, Marcus Thornwell did not look confident. Lucian took one step closer. The sound of his boot against marble echoed like a final verdict. Now, Lucian said quietly, place it back where it belongs. Marcus swallowed hard. His pride fought against him, but the pressure in the room made it impossible to ignore the command. Slowly, he reached toward Evelyn. The ribbon in his hand trembled slightly as he tried to restore it to her dress. His fingers barely touched the fabric before stopping. Lucian's voice cut through again, colder now. Not like that. Marcus froze completely. A faint ripple of shock moved through the nobles watching from the sides. Lucian's eyes shifted briefly toward Evelyn, then back to Marcus. On your knees, he said. The words were soft, controlled, final. Marcus stiffened. Your Majesty, on your knees, Lucian repeated, this time with no room for argument. The entire throne room seemed to collapse into silence as Marcus Thornwell, son of a powerful bloodline, slowly lowered himself onto one knee. The sound of his movement echoed through the marble hall like a crack in glass. Evelyn stepped back instinctively, overwhelmed by what she was witnessing. She had never seen anyone speak to Marcus like this, never seen anyone make him bend. Lucian finally looked away from Marcus and turned his attention fully to Evelyn. The intensity in his gaze softened, though only slightly. as if he was seeing something the rest of the world had refused to notice. He reached out and gently took the torn ribbon from Marcus's hand. Then, in a motion that silenced even the smallest whisper in the room, Lucien carefully fastened it back onto Evelyn's dress himself. The touch was precise, controlled, almost reverent. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She did not move. She did not speak. When Lucien finished, he did not step back immediately. Instead, he looked at her for a long moment, as if confirming something only he could understand. Around them, the throne room remained completely silent. Marcus was still on one knee. The nobles were frozen in disbelief. And Evelyn Carter stood in the center of it all, realizing for the first time that the rules of this world had just changed without anyone being allowed to speak about it. The entire throne room remained frozen in a silence so heavy it felt almost unnatural, as if even time itself was waiting for what would happen next. Marcus Thornwell was still on one knee, his head lowered slightly, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The pride that had defined him moments earlier had been completely stripped away under the pressure of Lucien Blackthorn's presence. Evelyn stood motionless beside the Alpha King, her mind struggling to process what she had just witnessed. Lucien's hands had been steady, careful, almost gentle when he fixed the ribbon back onto her dress. That simple action carried more weight than anything said in the throne room that night. Slowly, Lucien straightened and turned his attention fully to Evelyn. The intensity in his gaze was no longer cold, but it still held something unreadable, something that made it difficult for anyone to look away. "Stand closer," he said quietly. Evelyn hesitated for only a second before stepping forward. Each movement felt unreal, like she was walking through a dream she did not understand. The nobles watched without speaking, their earlier confidence completely replaced by uncertainty. Even the council members who had supported Marcus now remained silent, their expressions tense and unreadable. Lucien studied Evelyn for a long moment, as if searching for something only he could see. Then he turned slightly toward the room, addressing everyone without raising his voice. "This trial is over." The announcement should have been simple, but it struck the throne room like a final judgment. Several nobles immediately straightened in confusion. One of the elders stepped forward cautiously. "Your Majesty, the trials have not been completed according to tradition." Lucien did not even look at him. "Tradition does not decide what I recognize." The words were calm, but absolute. The elder stopped speaking immediately. No one else dared to challenge him. Evelyn's heart beat faster, not from fear, but from confusion. She did not understand what was happening, only that everything around her had shifted in a way she could not explain. Lucien turned his attention back to her. "Evelyn Carter," he said quietly. Hearing her name spoken by him felt different, heavier, like it now belonged to a different world. "You are dismissed from further trials." A soft wave of shock moved through the room. Some nobles looked relieved, others confused, and a few visibly unsettled. Being dismissed could mean failure, but Lucien's tone did not sound like rejection. It sounded like conclusion. Evelyn lowered her gaze slightly. "I understand," she said softly. She did not know what else to say. Lucien paused for a moment before speaking again. "Walk with me." The request caused a visible shift in the room. Murmurs began to rise, quickly suppressed by nervous glances at the throne. Evelyn froze. "Your Majesty?" she asked quietly, unsure if she had heard correctly. Lucien had already turned slightly toward the side exit of the throne room, where a narrow passage led beyond the ceremonial hall. He stopped and looked back at her only once. "Now," he said. There was no pressure in his voice this time, only certainty. Evelyn hesitated, feeling every pair of eyes in the room on her. Marcus remained silent on his knee, still unable to move. The nobles watched in stunned silence as Evelyn slowly took a step forward, then another, leaving the center of the silver crest behind her. When she finally followed Lucien toward the side passage, the throne room did not speak. It did not breathe. It simply watched as something unknown began to unfold, something no one in that hall had been prepared to understand. The side passage beyond the throne room was quieter than anything Evelyn had experienced inside the palace. The heavy doors closed behind them, cutting off the murmurs, the nobles, and the weight of hundreds of staring eyes. For the first time that night, Evelyn felt like she could breathe without being watched. But even in silence, She was aware of Lucian Blackthorn walking just a few steps ahead of her. His presence did not fade with distance. If anything, it followed like a steady pressure in the air, calm yet impossible to ignore. The corridor was lit by soft silver lanterns that reflected against polished stone walls. Every step echoed faintly, though Lucian's movements were almost soundless compared to hers. Evelyn kept her gaze slightly lowered, unsure if she was even allowed to speak. Finally, after what felt like several minutes, the corridor opened into a private balcony overlooking the frozen mountains surrounding the palace. Cold air swept in immediately, carrying the scent of pine and snow. Evelyn hesitated at the threshold. Lucian stopped at the edge of the balcony, looking out over the vast white landscape. "Do you know why they brought you here?" he asked quietly. Evelyn blinked, surprised by the question. "To test me," she said carefully. Lucian did not turn around. "That is what they believe." A pause stretched between them. The wind moved gently through the balcony railings, soft enough to almost feel like a whisper. Evelyn gathered her courage. "Then why did your Majesty stop the trial?" she asked. For a moment, Lucian said nothing. His silhouette remained still against the pale light of the moon. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than before. "Because the trial was never meant to find a Luna," he said. Evelyn frowned slightly, confused. "Then what was it meant for?" Lucian slowly turned toward her. The expression on his face was no longer distant. It was focused, as if he was making a decision that had been waiting a very long time. "It was meant to confirm what I already knew," he said. Evelyn felt her breath catch. "And what is that?" Lucian stepped closer, stopping just far enough to respect her space, but close enough that she could feel the difference in the air around him. "You are not weak," he said simply. The words landed quietly, but they carried more weight than anything she had heard that night. Evelyn shook her head slightly, almost instinctively. "That is not what they think," she whispered. Lucian's gaze did not waver. "What they think does not decide what you are." The wind shifted again, colder now, brushing against the edge of Evelyn's dress. She did not know how to respond. No one had ever spoken to her like this. Not in the palace. Not anywhere. Lucian turned his eyes back toward the mountains. "The kingdom is changing," he said, "and most of them do not realize it yet." Evelyn looked at him carefully. "Changing how?" she asked. There was a long silence before he answered. "They are about to see something they have spent their entire lives refusing to believe." Evelyn felt something tighten in her chest, not fear exactly, but uncertainty. She took a small step closer to the railing, looking out at the endless white horizon. "And what does that have to do with me?" she asked softly. Lucian's voice lowered, steady and certain. "Everything." The word lingered between them as the cold wind moved across the balcony, carrying it into the night. Behind them, deep inside the palace, the throne room remained in chaos and disbelief. But here, in the silence of the mountains, something far more important had already begun to take shape without anyone else yet understanding its meaning.